It's not about numbers. It's about where God's called you.
Hi, I'm Karl Vaters, and welcome to the Church Lobby, Conversations on Faith and Ministry. My guest in this episode is Kevin Foster, and we'll be talking about how your church can stand up and stand out by serving broken people. Our conversation is based on the content of his new book, Run to the Brokenness, How Your Church Can Be the Center of Your Community. Kevin is the founding pastor of LifeBridge Community Church in Fresno, California. This is a church that made a radical shift in emphasis several years ago when the brokenness of the people in their lower income city led them, as the book tells us, run to the brokenness. In this conversation, Kevin and I talk about redefining success in ministry, how many mission-minded young leaders I've met are not rejecting ministry, they're rejecting the narrow definitions of ministry success they've seen modeled. We'll look at a new way to look at church metrics, and we'll talk about how to finance ministry to broken people and a whole lot more. On a quick technical note, I had a glitch with my microphone in this interview, so the high-quality mic I'm using right now in the intro isn't the one that was on during the interview, so you'll notice a slight dip in quality. It's still clear, but you'll notice the difference. And don't forget to stick around when the interview is done. I'll come back with my quick take on the culture shift that's necessary for a church to go on offense and run to the brokenness instead of staying on defense and keeping broken people out. Well, Kevin Foster, welcome to the Church Lobby. It's good to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me on, Karl. I'm so excited to be a part of the podcast today. I really do appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome. Now, you and I are both from California.
Yes, we are.
You've written this book called Run to the Brokenness,
Mm-hmm.
How Your Church Can Be the Center of Your Community. And
Right.
for people who don't live where we live, there tends to be one or two preconceptions about California where they might look at the title of that book and go, well, what kind of brokenness have you got there? It's all Hollywood and glamour and Disney.
Mm-hmm.
Or on the other side, you're just a bunch of left-wing nuts. We don't care about what you...
Right, exactly.
All right. Now,
Yep.
I live very close to Disneyland and very close to Hollywood. You, however, live in Fresno, which not only is not geographically close to Disneyland, it's not even figuratively close to Disneyland. So for people who don't know about California, tell us a little bit about the city of Fresno and the ministry of your church there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karl. I really do appreciate it. I'm from the Midwest, so I'm familiar with people from the other parts of the country not really understanding the layout of California. Fresno is literally in the smack dab of the state. It's right in the middle of the state, halfway between San Francisco and Los Angeles. And there's a big agricultural area here. And so that's one of the driving forces of this area. And we're landlocked, so we don't have an ocean. Like you can probably go to out your house and be 5 minutes to the beach. We don't have that luxury, although we are close to the mountains. And so we're about 45 minutes from Yosemite. So it's really great. But Fresno is very unique. It's actually, unfortunately, has one of the dubious distinctions as being one of the most poverty-stricken places in the nation. Just a few years ago, it was like the third most food insecure area in the United States of America. And it's so crazy because we're like the breadbasket of the world.
Yeah, that's why I'm shocked at that.
Yeah.
I mean, I know there's poverty there, but that
Yeah.
they would be food deprived in one of the most rich agricultural regions in the world is really stunning.
Yeah, I think we feed like 80% of the world with the produce. Yeah, so it's pretty crazy. So a lot of it is, so there is some extreme wealth here because of the agriculture, but then there really is just a lot of poverty too. There's a lot of migrant workers that are here. There's just not a lot of business outside of agriculture, a lot of industry outside of that. So yeah, so I think this book, Run to the Brokenness, is just a response to the last 20 years of us planting our church here 20 years ago, moving from Illinois in faith. We planted our church in faith. Nobody paid us to come out here. Nobody said, hey, do this. We just honestly just felt like God said, move to Fresno and plant a church from scratch. And so, and with the movement that we're a part of, they don't even let you, like, it's considered like a parachute church plant where you're just like parachute, poo, and you just go in and you just do it. They don't even let you do it that way anymore in our movement because of the high failure rate. But we honestly, Carl, just felt like God called us to come here. I mean, there's just no other way to put it. So we packed up our belongings, moved out here in faith. Nobody paid us to come out here. We just did it. And so we planted the church 20 years ago. And I think over the last really 6 years is when it really became more pronounced during the pandemic. The need just really just was very much exposed during the pandemic. And so
Yeah.
we just responded to that. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Your story, it feels a little familiar. It has to be the Lord to send you to Fresno, just as
Right?
50 years ago this year, it had to be the Lord that took us to Modesto as a family.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, Modesto's, a couple hundred miles north of Fresno, but it's still in that same valley and it's still the same type of town and is on hard times now, like Fresno has been for some time as well, but is also this massive agricultural area all around it. So I'm very familiar with that part of the state. So for those of you who aren't familiar with California, there is a lot of brokenness here. And so if you are from somewhere in the Midwest or the South or the Pacific Northwest, wherever, and thinking, what does a California pastor have to tell me about, a broken and hurting community? That gives you some idea of that. There is a real context here that is universal and that we see in so many of the places that we travel to. So you established LifeBridge Community Church 20 years ago.
That's right.
And before we get to the book and running to the brokenness, what did it look like at first when you showed up? You showed up, as you said, with no support, just simply God called us. So how did the church even get started? How did the church plant begin?
Well, we moved out here in August of 2004, and we didn't launch the church until September of 2005. And so we were like strangers in a foreign land. And so I just started connecting with some pastors in the area and just told them about the vision that we had to plant a church. Some of the pastors in the area ended up getting together. In fact, the movement that we're a part of, there was about 10 to 12 churches, part of that same movement that said, hey, we want to kind of collaborate together, and we feel like God has called Kevin here, even though they didn't know me, but after a while getting to know me, they ended up supporting me in January of '05. And then we were attending another church. And so they allowed us to begin leading a small group at that church. And so we started leading a small group at that church and then just kind of took off from there. And so we started holding practice services the summer of '05. And then in September of '05, we launched at an elementary school with about 60 people. And so, yeah.
That's great. That's great. Well, the title of your book, which we're going to be talking about today, again, is Run to the Brokenness, How Your Church Can Be the Center of Your Community. So let me start by asking a question straight from the title. What does it mean to run to the brokenness, and what does that look like specifically at LifeBridge and in Fresno?
Yeah, I think the title Run to the Brokenness means that churches are uniquely called and qualified and gifted to solve the issues in the community and sometimes the biggest issues in the community. So it's basically a church understanding what the needs are that are right around that church facility or building or school, perhaps where they meet, and figuring out, God, what can our church do about that? What can our church do about that particular brokenness? And then the subtitle, How Your Church Can Come to the Center of the Community, is really a call to help local churches to redefine what success means. So it doesn't matter the size of church that somebody has. They could be 50 or 200 or 5, whatever, right? Just as long as they're figuring out a way to run to the brokenness in their area, thereby when they run to the brokenness, they become the hub of that community. And so in my book, there's a chapter on redefining the metrics. We'll probably get into that a little bit later, I'm sure. But I just feel like for too long in America, we only have one measure of success, and that's our Sunday morning attendance. And so the basic message behind the book is saying, hey, if you are doing something about the brokenness around you, you're already successful, right?
Yeah.
And that being celebrated and honored, not just at that local church level, but even at the other levels where we get together with our colleagues and, how many people you have in church. Well, those conversations don't happen as much as they used to necessarily, but sometimes it's a little bit under the radar. And so I don't know. I think we need to honor people differently than we have in the past in regards to that. So, but I want to answer your question because you said, what does it look like here in Fresno to run to the brokenness? For us, it was during the pandemic when it first started. We saw people freaking out. Our church is located right across the street from a Costco. Probably all of your listeners and you, Carl, remember during the pandemic, people were freaking out, man, about getting a roll of toilet paper.
Yeah. Oh,
So,
yeah. Yeah.
do you remember those days? How
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's so hard to imagine that people were that way. So I would literally look at our front door and see that. And I asked God, what could we do? And then that's when the Lord spoke to me and said, start a pandemic of hope to counter the pandemic of fear and hysteria.
Mm.
And so then we said, okay, what can we do? Well, we started offering a prayer line. And so literally the young adults of our church would go out to the corner right across the street from Costco, hold up signs saying, need prayer? Come on over here. And so to our surprise, Carl, people just responded. That was literally us running to the brokenness, like literally across
Yeah,
the street.
yeah.
There was fear and hysteria. And so we started this prayer line. Well, to my surprise, it just really started to grow. And so we started offering drive-through prayer because we wanted to be, socially distanced and responsible and everything. And so the lines would grow to be over a mile too long. Then the news media picked up on it, and then it was getting bigger. But then what happened, Carl, is one of the prayer needs that most people would have was for food. And so I thought, man, just the Lord really convicted me and said, okay, are you just going to pray for somebody and pray
Hmm.
that they have enough food, or are you going to do something about it? And so I'm like, Lord, well, we're going to do something about it. So in the beginning, we asked our congregation members just to kind of throughout the week, because we were shut down at that time. And if you're a pastor listening, you remember the horrendous pain that you had of not meeting with your congregation for a lengthened period of time. And I remember that. But what kept our community together is this whole thing. And so people started dropping off their food items, and then it just got to be too much. And so we started partnering with our food bank. The problem is the food bank wanted a warehouse. We didn't have a warehouse, but we were shut down on our Sunday morning. And that's when the Lord clearly spoke to us, Carl, and said, turn your sanctuary into a storehouse. And so we did that. So we removed all the chairs, and
Wow.
our sanctuary space is about 5,000 square feet or so. And then we literally, I'm no joke, like we had pallets upon pallets throughout the week stacked up. We have a ceiling that's about 20 foot high. And so they would stacked up be about 15 to 16 feet high. And it literally looked like, and it literally turned into a warehouse. And so we started feeding people every week. We would feed anywhere from 2,500 to 3,000 people every single week.
Yeah.
And then that went on for about a year and a half. And so that's how, I mean, I could go on and on and on about other brokenness that we've addressed. And of course, it's in the book too. But that's how it all began for us.
Yeah. Turn your sanctuary into a storehouse sounds like something that certainly had to have been answered metaphorically, right? But you literally turned your sanctuary into a storehouse.
Literally.
Yeah.
Literally. And yeah, literally and figuratively, I guess, too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, well, what it ended up doing, Carl, is it like people turned to us for, the physical sustenance, but then spiritually too, people turned to us. So we would offer prayer at the end. Of course, we wouldn't make people like some people make, oh, to get your food, you have to get prayer, you have to come to church. We didn't do that. We
Right.
offered prayer at the end if people wanted it. And, most people wanted to take advantage of that. So we saw so many people saved during the pandemic because people were afraid. So many
Yeah.
people were afraid. And the crazy thing about, remember earlier we talked about how Fresno's so agriculturally rich. So we had a raisin farmer actually come through our line during the pandemic, and we actually handed out raisins that day. And when we were talking to him, he actually looked on the bottom of the package. He said, "Oh, these raisins come from my farm."
Wow.
Because at that time something was going on with the federal government, and so they weren't getting paid. And so this farmer who farms, it wasn't a huge farm, it was like, I don't know, maybe 40, 50 acres. So he would farm raisins, but he wasn't getting paid. He heard about our grocery giveaway, and he came through our grocery giveaway line and ended up getting raisins that was from his farm originally.
Wow. Oh, that's fantastic. And just for anybody who's listening and who wants to do a gotcha, we are both aware that raisins begin as grapes, but they process them into raisins. And
Oh yeah,
there's a lot of
absolutely. Yeah.
raisin production
Yeah.
in the Central
Yeah,
Valley,
he's
especially in Fresno. It's a
oh yeah,
real,
absolutely. Of course they
yeah.
start, yeah, of course they start as grapes. Yeah, just in case anybody didn't know that. That
Yeah, I know. You can save your emails. We know they start as grapes.
yeah.
But you mentioned earlier, redefining success in ministry, and it was one of those things, obviously, that really caught my attention when I read, from the book. I believe we need to redefine what success in ministry really means. And as a guy who's opening session at most of the conferences I teach at is titled "Redefining Success in Ministry," that obviously caught my attention. So what you just described is a real redefining of it, just the whole idea of turning your sanctuary into a storehouse physically and literally. So let's just talk about, let me make it an open-ended question at first. How have we defined ministry wrongly, and how do we need to redefine it?
Well, yeah, I think in, Western culture, we define it almost exclusively by how many people are attending on Sunday and how big our budget is. And oftentimes those two metrics of success are not where pastors want them to be. And I think for a couple of reasons, we compare. And so we look at the church across town from us and we look, well, I'm not that, or I'm not this. And I think for a number of reasons, conferences that pastors go to are often about how to increase your Sunday morning attendance, how to fill a building. And by the way, I'm not opposed to that. I don't think there's anything wrong with people coming into the building. I'm a pastor. I preach almost every Sunday. So I want people to be there. So I'm not like, throw that
Yeah.
out or anything. But I think if we've entirely put too much stock in that one metric and then the tithe and offering, when in reality, I mean, that's not the majority of churches in America, as you well know. And this is something that I think that you've done a really good job of raising awareness, the value of the small church in every community. And furthermore, with this message of run to the brokenness, I actually think small churches are better positioned to run to the brokenness than sometimes mega churches are. And I think I heard a statistic, I can't quote who it was, but 80% of a staff's work throughout the week is centered just on Sunday morning.
Yeah, it sounds about right.
I think that happens a lot is like everybody's consumed with Sunday morning. And I understand I want our Sunday morning service to be excellent. I'm not saying, think about it at the last minute or whatever. But man, I'm wondering like what would change in America if pastors on staffs, if they were blessed enough to be able to get paid by the church, like if we took, instead of putting 80% of our effort on Sunday morning, if we put maybe 40 or 50%. And then the other part, like, okay, what can we do to engage the community that's just around the corner from us and the brokenness that's there.
Yeah, I fully agree. In fact, it goes to one of the points that I really appreciated that you made in the book. Find it on page 52 of your book. You
Mhm.
said some of the most passionate, mission-minded young leaders I've met are not rejecting ministry. They're rejecting the narrow definitions of ministry success that they've seen modeled. And I think you're right. I look around and I see younger generations, and they don't even know how to phrase it like you just did. They just know they're not attracted to what they see in the current model of pastoral ministry, but they still feel called to ministry. They feel called to worship Jesus. They feel called to worship the church. And most of them, because they're younger and they're still trying to figure things out, can't verbalize what you did. But I'm convinced of that. I just talked to Sam Rayner, and his podcast will be out one or two episodes before this one with you. I don't know yet because while you're listening to this, and you know when Sam Rayner is, as I'm talking to Kevin, Sam Rayner's podcast hasn't dropped yet. But when I talked to Sam Rayner, he and I talked about this coming wave of pastoral resignations and
Oh,
that there isn't an incoming wave of young pastors to meet that need like there was in previous generations. And there are some people who would answer that by saying, well, young people just don't care about the church anymore. But I think you've really put your finger on it. They are not rejecting ministry, but they're rejecting the narrow definitions of ministry success that they've seen modeled. So, how do we model a better version of successful ministry to that next generation?
hmm. Yeah, well, I think it starts at our conferences, Carl. I mean, I'm on a planning committee for a conference, another pastors conference here in our area. And one of them, I just literally came out of that planning meeting and they wanted to have some guy there who's, grown his church like in a miraculous way. And that's awesome, right? In 12 years, he's like thousands of people, right? And that's cool. And we
Mhm.
love that. And there's certainly a place for that in the body of Christ. But my issue is that those are the only people that we put up at conferences. You know what I'm saying? And that doesn't represent 95% of the pastors and the churches that exist in America today. And they might be feeding people, right? They might be a church of 50 people and they're feeding 100 people a week, right? But then the pastor goes to that kind of a conference, he walks away and he feels like an utter failure because he feels like I've been here for 15 years faithfully serving these people, but I feel like a failure. And I think this is why so many pastors are resigning and they're giving up because that's why we need to redefine success. We need to
Yeah.
redefine it. I don't know what it's going to take. It's going to take probably denominations and movements like really adopting other metrics other than just Sunday morning and valuing that and celebrating that even in our denominational meetings. Like, hey, wow, Carl, your church, man, you fed 5,000 people, this past year. Hey, you get an award for, you know what I'm saying? It's just
Hmm.
like,
Yeah.
I just think it's going to take, a good friend of mine says what gets rewarded gets repeated. And so I think we have to start measuring in the Bible, and I share this in my chapter on occupational hazards and ministry. I know this is going to be bonus content for later, but
Yeah,
the Apostle Paul says it's foolish to compare ourselves with ourselves, right?
yeah,
And we do it anyway. But so I guess if we're going to do that, let's like include other metrics other than just Sunday morning.
yeah. I fully agree. What gets rewarded gets repeated. In addition to that, for pastors especially, what gets platformed gets copied.
Yep. Oh yeah.
So if we're only platforming those who have had stunning overnight success and then others don't get it, first of all, that's what they're going to try to copy. And then if they don't get it and they haven't seen an alternative, I'm not asking for the people who are pastoring big churches to be taken off the platform. I'm just asking for space for the rest of us.
That's right.
Let's
Yeah.
let's share it. Let's get everybody up there, and especially those that are representing the more common forms of pastoral ministry, such
Right.
as what your church is doing. So you talked earlier about a new form of metrics, and in your book, you actually outlined three different metrics that we can consider. So let me throw them at you one at a time and get your response to them. The first
Yeah.
one you mentioned is one of the new metrics is spiritual impact.
Yeah, so I think when it comes to spiritual impact, I think most churches would agree that a fully devoted follower of Jesus Christ is what we're all trying to form here. So somebody who is like, who came to your church a year ago, are they more of a devoted follower of Christ now than they were a year ago? So I think that's definitely one area right there that we need to place more value on. And I think we've seen a little bit of a movement with that. You remember years ago with Bill Hybels, it was all about the seeker sensitive model. But then Willow Creek came out and said, hey, we were all wrong, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
And then they said, it's all about discipleship. So I think, we're starting to see some movement toward that where people in churches are valuing like how many people are in their small groups, how many are in Bible studies, how many are in life groups, And so I think we're seeing some movement toward that, which I think is important because, I mean, Jesus said, go therefore in Matthew chapter 28 and make disciples of all
Yeah,
nations. So
yeah,
I think that needs to be the primary metric, perhaps. So I think when I talked about spiritual impact, that's what I'm talking about.
yeah, yeah. Spiritual impact is the first one. Second one then is social impact.
Yeah. So that would be like how your church is meeting the social needs that are in your community. So, like, what are the issues that are right outside of your door? So, I had an opportunity to share about this book in a breakout session at a conference just a couple days ago. I actually was very vulnerable, and I'm going to be vulnerable right now. When we first occupied this building that we're leasing still, there were a lot of homeless people around here. And so, in fact, I can remember one of the first days that we moved in to start some construction. We left some of our laptops and we locked the door, but there was an alarm. And so some people broke in and stole our laptops. And so
Mhm.
so like the first 2 or 3 years, like we just didn't do anything to engage in the homeless population around here. And so, and I tell the story in the book too. One day, one of our members of our congregation said, "Hey, can I invite the homeless lady that stands at the corner?" And I said, "Sure." But then deep down inside, I was like,
With that level of enthusiasm.
I know I'm trying to build a church where people feel comfortable to be at.
Mhm.
And then isn't that just the thing too? Sometimes that when you've pastored in a place for a long time, sometimes you think, I wish I had this type of congregation and not this congregation.
Mhm.
And so
Oh yeah.
I think if all of our pastors, if we're honest, we would say that probably a little bit here and there. And so I didn't want to be known as the homeless church. But what was I going to do? Was I going to say no? And so the Lord really convicted my heart. And of course I said, well, of course, Michael, you can invite this person. So she shows up a couple weeks later. She keeps coming. And of course she smells and everything like the homeless people
Mhm.
tend to do. But after a few weeks, she ended up raising her hand and gave her life to Jesus, started growing in the Lord, and then ends up bringing her husband, who's been addicted to drugs his whole life, on the streets, so much so that he lost a leg over it.
Wow.
We rented out a movie theater one time, and there was a Christian movie there. He ends up giving his life to the Lord at that movie theater, which is
Wow.
crazy. And then today, now they actually are still going strong in the Lord. And she now has a job and they have their own apartment now.
Wow, that's great.
It's because of not even me, right? Like I was not spiritual. I mean, I was just like, you know what I'm saying? And it was
Oh
because
yeah.
this guy in my church says, "Hey, can I invite this homeless lady to the church?" So I think when I talk about social impact, I talk about, what are you doing to house people? What are you doing to clothe people? For a while, we were honored to have a thrift store in our community, and we literally had over 2 to 3,000 people a month that we were helping clothe.
Mhm.
At that time. We want to relaunch that when we get our future compassion center one day. We want to relaunch that thrift store. It was a really great thrift store. So feeding people, clothing people, housing people, meeting their practical needs, I think is really important.
Yeah, I think that's huge. One of the real cautions of the numbers driven approach to success in ministry is if you're driven by numbers, then you become driven by efficiency. And the story you just described about that homeless woman and eventually her husband coming to the Lord, that happened in a very inefficient way. Like it was one person who multiple members of the church had to invest a lot of time in for a long time.
And they did.
Yeah, and they did. And that impact is an eternal impact which cannot be measured. But if you're constantly asking for where's the measurement for success, you're going to miss opportunities like that. And we need to be open to doing inefficient things because it's the right thing to do at the time, because people are of infinite value and their value to Christ and to the kingdom cannot be measured. Yep.
So there's been several times, man, where I've said, and I've had the opportunity to go to a bigger church or whatever, but I mean, I have a great mentor who has just said, Kevin, it's not about numbers, it's about where God's called you. And I try to
Yeah.
make that point in the book too, is just sometimes I think some pastors sell themselves short because maybe they don't feel like they're in a big context and they feel like they have to do the Western thing or climb the corporate ladder and go to a bigger church. And sometimes that is God's will. I'm not discounting that, but I think sometimes we will miss out some huge miracles. For example, if I would have taken those other opportunities, man, I would have never seen this book come about. And now that sharing this message, and it's been so exciting to see how this message is resonating with so many people. And I would have sold myself short of God's amazing plan for my life if I had followed the typical Western culture, climb the corporate ladder kind of a thing.
Yeah. No, I fully agree with that. You and me both. And now a short break to talk about something else. If you like the content you're hearing, here are two things you can do for us. First, forward this podcast to a friend. Second, consider becoming a financial supporter through Patreon, Venmo, or PayPal. Just go to karlvaters.com/support. For as little as $3 a month, you can help us put these resources into the hands of the ministries that need them the most. Our support link is in the show notes. Spiritual impact, social impact, and the third new metric you talk about is economic impact.
Yeah. Well, that's fun. That's exciting because so we often say the phrase around here that we are here not just to give a hand out, but we want to give a hand up.
Mm-hmm.
So in the Central Valley, going back to our local context for those listeners who may not be familiar with the demographic here in Fresno, there's a lot of generational poverty. So,
Yeah.
in other words, they grew up in this certain level of income. Their grandparents were that way, their great grandparents were that way, and so they have no idea of education, perhaps, or how to further their lives economically. So, we have a Spanish campus here that more than 50% of those friends don't even have a checking account, right? And so we feel like one of our missions is not just to get them ready for eternity and help their soul go to heaven, which we all agree that's objective number one. This is not a social gospel. This is not even social justice. I think it's a spiritual mission that we care for their lives here on this earth. And so, pastors, you're listening in. What if somebody from your congregation or somebody from your community said this? Because of that church, because of your church, in our case, because of LifeBridge Church or because of Cornerstone Church, I now have a job.
Mm-hmm.
I now have like an income that I can provide for my family. And so we've seen this happen in so many different ways with our economic development corporations that we've developed, social enterprises that we've developed. Like I said, we had a thrift store for a while, and we were able to give people who are hard to employ, unemployable, and people that wouldn't have a chance in employment jobs so that they could provide for their families. We had an event center for 5 years. We're actually starting another event center right now where we can provide people job skills on how to be able to, run an event, management skills. And it is so much fun to be a part of being able to help lift somebody economically. And and I think in there, I talk about funding the mission too. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to talk about that, but
Yeah, we will.
up happening is because we're doing that, it's opening up the door for other funding sources outside of the tithes and the offerings, which is incredible. And it's so rewarding because When you are able to help somebody economically live their economic life, there's so much dignity that comes with that. And they will become so loyal to your church
Yeah.
because you've actually helped them.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned it already, and I know those who are listening, a bunch of them are already asking, okay, I'd love to be able to have that kind of economic hand up for people, but our church is barely struggling to pay our own bills. But you write an entire chapter, chapter 8, on funding the mission, where you talk about that there are ways that churches can develop multiple income streams. They can create a different way of doing all of this. So talk through some of this. Give us some starter points where we can begin to rethink about how to fund the mission in more creative ways than just the standard ways we've all been taught and maybe have been limited by.
Yeah, I'm so passionate about this part right here because I feel like oftentimes the lack of funding holds back churches, and our church is located in a lower socioeconomic area. And so I think the average household income just a few years ago when we did a study was about 40,000 a year, which isn't a lot for California, even though it's Fresno.
No,
It's not where you live, but even for
no,
Fresno, that
yeah,
is very low. It's even below the poverty line. So we had to figure out ways to really generate income outside of the tithes and the offerings because the people of the church, they tithe, but they're not, wealthy people. We don't have wealthy people in our church. And so we have to figure out, okay, how can you sustain growth? How can you pay for staff members? Like, how can you sustain the ministries financially when the tithe is only so much? And sometimes we do 90-day tithe challenges and everything too. So, but there's only so much blood that you can get out of a turnip, so to speak. And so over the last 5 years, this is no joke, this is no exaggeration. We have generated over $4 million worth of revenue outside of the tithes and offerings with our social enterprises and with grants that we've been able to win. We actually started two other nonprofits to be able to help us to be able to do that. And I think as you run to the brokenness, you will find that there are people that want to get behind that are outside of your church. Especially, it's been proven that government will give grants to faith-based organizations. They'll be more open to that because they know that the faith-based organizations often leverage those funds the best.
yeah,
Because, right, we're Christians, we're not cheating. And of course, I know this time frame is going to be up, but there's a lot of fraud happening, in the government, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. So I think, especially even now with all the context, what's happening in America, with a lot of the fraud occurring, people are going to be looking for nonprofits that are perhaps faith-based that have a proven track record of using those dollars well.
yeah,
So I would say grants, if you're doing compassion work, if you're running to the brokenness already, there are people that want to fund that. Number two, social enterprises that are akin to a church, that are adjacent to the type of, like for an event center, for example, like usually churches have decent environments. And what I've noticed that oftentimes there aren't really high-end event centers in a lot of communities because it's hard to make just an event center work financially. And so, like an event center is like something that is easy for a church to be able to do and earn extra money. So I mean,
yeah,
I'm telling you, it really has advanced our mission forward.
yeah. I was conducting a pastor's cohort last night, and we were talking about what could you do at your church as a single step towards health in your congregation. And two of the congregations that spoke up, one of them said, we're right next to a high school and we're trying to figure out how to reach them. And we want to offer our facility to them. And the other one said, we're right next to a senior center. And so
Mm,
we began to talk about how they can use their resources, their facilities to
right.
offer space for events or whatever for the people who are right there next to them, as well as ministering to them. So
Hmm.
recognizing the people that are around them and then offering what they have is starting with a facility that happens to be next to a senior center, for instance.
Hmm.
As people see that, that then helps them to visualize the value of the gospel by seeing it played out in real time and in real work. Jesus had a ministry where obviously his emphasis was the kingdom of God. The number of times he used the word kingdom of God or kingdom of heaven is, maybe in the hundreds. I mean, it was this constant message. But what was it that attracted the crowds? It was the miracles. Now, to the point where he got frustrated with them chasing miracles. Okay.
Right. Right.
We have to have that same caution in ours as well. But once they see the visual representation of healing through these kinds of things, that opens their hearts and their minds to go more deeply spiritual. In addition to the fact that, well, feeding hungry people is just what Jesus called us to do. It's a big part of what he called us to do. So sometimes I'm like, but how many people then got saved? And I want to start and go, let's start with how many people who were hungry got fed. And let's
That's
just
yeah.
celebrate that for a moment, shall we,
Oh,
before we
yeah,
move on to the
absolutely.
next?
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on with that. And then what happens is what really cool is like people see that and they want to be a part of that, financially. We're just like, even just recently, Carl, it's been crazy. Like I've made some connections with people that are connected to banks. And so in banks, they have this regulatory issue called CRA, Community Reinvestment Act, where banks are required to invest into nonprofits in the community. They have to.
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
and I didn't know that before. And so like I've just started getting connected to that. And that world is starting to take off a little bit for the nonprofit that we started because we're doing a lot of compassion work in the community. It's just people just noticing and God giving you favor. I
yeah,
mean, it's just like I said in the book, if you're obedient, and if you're open, God will open up doors for you. So like when we started this event center, yes, it was to help people's economic life. Yes, it was to help be another economic engine for the church, which I think churches should have multiple economic engines
yeah,
outside of the tithe and the offering. Because then the other thing too, and I know where I'm going a little bit long on this, but I think this is super important. Sometimes as pastors, we're beholden to just that tithe and offering engine. And a lot of times we don't want to make changes in the church because we don't upset somebody that's trying to control the church through their financial donations. And so what happens is that if you feel like you need to make a move, like in terms of a strategic move, but you're not making it because of this financial donor, when you have an alternative stream of income, listen, you're not beholden to that donor. You're
yeah.
beholden to the vision God's given you. And then you're able to move forward. And if that donor comes on board with that vision, then great. If they don't, and if they remove their tithe, guess what? You're going to be okay. You're still going to be able to pay yourself and the staff because you've got this alternative source of income. And I just think it helps churches move them forward.
Yeah, fully agree. What you're talking about here is a real cultural shift. The entire culture outside the church as well is experiencing this. The idea of getting a single job that pays the bills, let alone for 40 years until I retire, is
Right.
long gone. Right
It
now,
really
the
is.
multiple income stream is a necessity for virtually everyone now, and the church is no exception to that. So we need to get better at that for all kinds of different reasons, some of which you've already mentioned. But it really does mean a shift of the culture. And you do, in fact, in the book, address church culture, which we don't have time to get into in this conversation. But I love that you address discipleship, that you address some of the financial factors, you address redefining ministry, you address culture. These are topics that I'm constantly coming back to as essential things that we need to be rethinking. In fact, one of the things that you say in the book about culture is that the culture of your church will never be healthier than the soul of its leaders. So,
Mm.
in addition to reaching out to the broken people around you, you talk about the brokenness that sometimes is in the pulpit as well. And in fact,
Mhm.
here's what I want to do. You mentioned it earlier, and we had talked about it before. I want to do as our bonus content, I want to talk about your chapter 9, which is the occupational hazards of ministry and
Mhm.
some solutions to these occupational hazards so that we're working on the brokenness of the pastor as well. So if you want to get that bonus material that Kevin and I will be talking about right after we're done with the main podcast, you can get it one of two ways. You can become a financial partner by going to karlvaters.com/support. If you become a monthly partner, you will get all kinds of bonus materials, including the weekly newsletter that has a link to all of our bonus content from all the podcasts. If all you want to get is the bonus content from the podcast, including this one, you can get that for free. Go to karlvaters.com/subscribe and you'll get the free Friday newsletter with all of the podcast episodes, all the articles we write, and all of the news about what's coming up. So go to either one of those places. We're going to talk about those occupational hazards of ministry and how to begin to overcome them. But before we get to the lightning round and close out this main podcast, let me ask you a question that you can address to my guess would be some of our listeners. If someone is listening and says, okay, I get it, and I love the idea of running into the brokenness, I want to see our church do that too, but I don't see how our church can do it. We have enough of our own problems without becoming a clearinghouse for other people's problems. How do we get past that initial hurdle?
Yeah, I think that's a big one because in writing this book too, I was just like wrote it because I'm a pastor. I've been a pastor for years, and so I get it. Like this is just another thing or another initiative or like, oh my gosh, I don't need to do another thing right now. So, but what I think that when a church decides to become a run to the brokenness type of church, I think it simplifies so many things. It really does. And it makes, I think, the job of that pastor easier. And I think it goes back to a theological mandate that God ran to our brokenness through Jesus Christ. That's exactly what he did. Like he made the ultimate sacrifice by sending his son to us. And so I think when we can mirror that mission, we become more like Christ. I think in a lot of ways, it simplifies a local church and it really commands a blessing over that local church when they become a run to the brokenness type of church. And I think that's the theological point I wanted to make with that. Secondly, willing to help come alongside churches and consult them too. So would love to do that. My board, I'm not leaving my church. I don't want to leave my church, want to retire here one day, hopefully. But they do understand the importance of this message. And so I'm happy to come alongside a church and consult it. I'm going to be later this year starting some Zoom cohorts as well for pastors.
Right.
So, and then I'm also, it's crazy because now I'm like, I've got already a few different conferences based on the book booked across the nation. And so I'm willing to come to an area and do a regional pastors conference too to kind of help people walk through it. So
Terrific. So if anybody wants to reach out to you about that, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
just go to runtothebrokenness.com. That'd be the
Okay.
best way. Everything's right there. Runtothebrokenness.com. I also have like a church campaign kit that a church can go through that we actually went through, sermon outlines, small group curriculum, some activities for the leaders and everything. So they can pick up that. There's other resources on there as well, books, study guides, masterclass, everything's on there. So
Terrific. Yeah, we'll put a link to that in the show notes, of course. Well, before we let you go, we're going to walk you through the lightning round.
sure.
All righty. So, okay, we got four lightning round questions. Question number one: what are the biggest changes you've seen in your field of ministry in the last few years, and how have you adapted to them?
I think exactly the message of this book. So, I mean, for me, I wrestled with this whole thing of attendance, and I'm seeing that attendance is like one of the primary metrics. I'm seeing so many people not resonate with that too right now. So, for me, I think it's the shift now. I see a lot of people wanting to make that shift. Again, not that we don't want our Sunday morning attendance where we do, but not placing so much emphasis on that. I think that's the biggest shift that I've seen in as I've
Yeah,
talked to the people.
yeah, I agree. And as we talked about earlier, a lot of people are feeling the shift. They don't know how to verbalize it. And that's why
Right.
ministries like yours and what we
Yep.
try to do here at Helping Small Churches Thrive, we have to verbalize it so that people go, oh, that's what I'm feeling. And
Yeah.
once you can verbalize it, you can then activate something to change it and to do something better. Because until you can put words to it, you're really just kind of sitting in a haze of loss. You don't know what to do next. So, yeah, I love that. Secondly, what free resource like an app or a website has helped you lately that you would recommend for small church ministry?
I think there is, well, it's not free, but it's Mission Insight. I know has really helped us when we try to decipher around us, the brokenness around us. Mission Insight will give you like a complete demographic breakdown of the area, education status. They'll let you know what the primary needs are and the concerns are of the people. And so for us, Mission Insight is very helpful. And particularly if the church wants to run to the brokenness and find the needs in the area, Mission Insight is just a great, great resource.
Where would we find that? Missioninsight.com, .org?
Missioninsight.com, I believe it is.
Okay.
Missioninsight.com.
We'll,
Yeah.
we'll, we'll confirm that and we'll put that in the
Yeah.
show notes as
Confirm it.
well.
Yeah.
Third, what's the best piece of ministry advice you've ever received?
Bloom where you're planted. My mentor, I call him Papa G, Gary Grogan. He's a mentor to so many people. He's just a great spiritual father. In fact, he's got a book out coming on spiritual father and coming out soon. And he has just been so helpful to me to learn the contentment of ministry, of being here in the same place for 20 years. And we've seen nominal growth. We haven't seen explosive growth, but, and just being content in ministry, I think bloom where you're planted. I think that is a really something that's really helped me to sustain here.
Yeah. Well, as someone who's 33 years and counting serving the same church, I can tell you there are some things that only happen over long-term ministry
Yeah.
you don't know until you've stuck around for it. So yeah, appreciate that. And then the final one is this. What's the funniest or weirdest thing you've ever seen in church?
Oh boy. I would say one time I was doing a wedding and the fire alarm went off. And so,
Oh,
oh my gosh, that was so crazy. And they couldn't figure out how to turn it off for like at least 20 minutes. And so I was just like, do I keep going? Do I stop, and just wait? But
Hmm.
no, I just kept plowing through, man, and I just tried to speak louder than the fire alarm. And so that was, oh my gosh, that was so hard. That was so difficult to deal with, but
Yeah.
everybody laughed afterwards. So,
Yeah. It seems like the more formal the occasion, the more likely something just wacky like that is going to happen to just throw you off your game.
and I'm not
Yeah.
even sure if the couple's married anymore or not, but who knows? I
Oh.
don't know.
Well, we won't blame the fire alarm or you if that's the case.
Right, exactly.
Again, in the bonus material, we're going to talk about how to overcome the occupational hazards of ministry. But for this podcast, we thank you so much for being with us, Kevin. The book, again, is Run to the Brokenness, How Your Church Can Be the Center of Your Community. Thanks for the book. Thank you for this message. Thank you for the ministry that you do through LifeBridge Church in Fresno as well. We really appreciate your time today, Kevin.
Thanks so much, Karl. I really do appreciate it.
The culture conversation has been a huge part of my thought and teaching over the last few years, and for good reason. As I define it in my conference talks, a church's culture is the unwritten set of rules that governs everything a church does. So, if your church culture puts up walls to keep broken people out, that's not written anywhere, and most people probably wouldn't even admit it, but it becomes a part of your culture. You're keeping broken people out instead of reaching out to where they are and welcoming them in. So what can you do to start to shift that culture? Here are a couple ideas that may make you a little uncomfortable, and sometimes that's okay. First, you need a heart change in your church, and that heart change in your church begins in what the pastor emphasizes and how the pastor lives in front of the congregation. So if you're a pastor, spend time in prayer to ask the Lord to show you not just what your church can do to reach broken people, but first of all, what you can do. We lead by example. Then, as the church sees that the actions of our personal lives are matching the message of generosity that we're preaching, they'll become more open to hear us and to follow our example. Church cultures don't change nearly as much by what the pastor says as by what the pastor does and who the pastor is. This episode was produced by Veronica Beaver. It was edited by Phil Vaters. Original theme music was written and performed by Jack Wilkins of jackwilkinsmusic.com. The graphic design is by Solomon Joy. And me, I'm Karl Vaters, and I hope to talk with you again in the church lobby.